Hey, okay, there we go. How's it going, everybody? Welcome back. Thank you for coming to another Thursday Industry Chats. This week's guest, Mr. Henry Faber, long,
Woo.
notable community legend in the Toronto scene.
Ah,
Um, Let me see. What else can I call you? He's a nice guy. He's a nice dude. Uh,
I'm a
event
nice guy.
event event organizer. Uh, building person builds community.
Here, read my Twitter
Oh
bio.
God, do I have
No, no, here,
let me do
I
that.
can do it if you want. Here, like I can do it because I worked like this is a good venue for this because I always workshop this.
Oh, okay.
Henry Faber, right? Henry Faber. I develop accessible art spaces, Toronto Media Arts, and communities. Gamma Space TO, VR, video game and digital producer. My avatar is by OK Kelly K. You can find me at henry@gammaspace.ca, and my pronouns are he and him.
These are all true statements.
True
Uh,
statements.
um, yeah. For those of you who don't know, I guess first give them a rundown of what like T-Mac
This
and
stuff is.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and
yeah.
Game of Space.
So yeah, we got. So I got involved heavily in the Toronto indie game development scene around 2012, with the opening of Gamma Space, which has gone through a couple of names, but is Gamma Space, which is a co-working space for independent game makers. And so what it was about was all of the indie game teams and individuals who were breaking out of their daytime jobs and wanting to take advantage of the success that was coming out of like working on Steam and other platforms, but Steam primarily at the time. Uh, they wanted a place to come and have that game jam feeling and that place to work and the camaraderie where people understood that what they were doing and hacking through projects. And so we really resonated with us, and so we opened up this co-working space for that. But something magical happened, and that magical thing was that not only was the community super progressive and interested in bettering themselves and bettering games and art and talking about things, they wanted to engage with some of the problems that are unfortunately super inherent and visible in the world today in games, which is like rampant sexism and everything from abusive and toxic like working conditions, and particularly those against women and marginalized folks. So out of our space, we hosted Dames Making Games when they first started, which was really awesome. And together we started to like really think about what it was to create safe spaces and inclusive spaces, including things like codes of conduct and like thinking about like who is there making games. So it's not just the same white dudes that look like me. There's a lot of bearded white dudes in video games. But there was a chance for more. And then from there, we just started doing more and more community engagement. We had started BitBazaar, Jenny's brainchild. Jenny is my partner in all things and executive director of Dames Making Games. She she brought BitBazaar, which is around that time, and just before that I started meeting a lot more of the community. And BitBazaar was an opportunity for indie game makers to come in, engage with the public, show off their games. And for some of them, it was like the first time people had even touched their games in person that they'd see. Even in 2012 and 2013, people would, they would fire off their games onto the internet or onto Steam or whatever and hope for the best,
Yeah,
and they wouldn't necessarily know if anyone had a chance to play unless they were lucky enough to get a spot at like what was it, like the PAX 10 and stuff like that, right? Like really
right.
specific, like, kind of industry stuff. And then
It's
we just
really expensive industry stuff.
yeah, I hear that a virtual booth costs
Oh my
$4,500
God, yeah, we
US
can
now.
we can talk about that in a bit, but
Yeah, uh, but yeah, like so we started hosting that and promoting that and working with just more and more game community members, which led to more and more arts community members, which led to like got us sort of like tapped into the scene in a larger way, including helping like the Ontario Arts Council and all the funders in Ontario and Toronto here in Canada to get them to start like opening up their what do you call their grant applications to have video games. So we started engaging in that conversation and helping people get that money, which was really important to us. And then from there, because I was around all the time, I was lucky enough to engage with a lot of members to help produce their digital projects. And that's where that comes in that part of my bio. So I end up being a producer and project manager and advisor and marketer and graphic designer and game designer and all these other weird roles that come out of just being around doing this stuff. And so I've worked on games like, probably the last 10 years, probably about 10 games that have ended up on various platforms, which has been really exciting. And then the final thing, while we're talking about me, is I was talking about how like we were paying attention to the inclusive art spaces and thinking about our games in the larger conversation of art. And that's when we got involved with the Toronto Media Arts Center, which is this 40,000 square foot facility here in downtown Toronto, which has 4 artists in it, arts organizations in it. So Gamma Space, Dames Making Games, Charles Street Video, and CFMDC, which stands for the Canadian Filmmakers Distribution Center. And we've got galleries and an unfinished cinema space. And we've got all this public exhibition space where we were hosting all sorts of video game events, from bit bazaars to like illustration and comic shows to like exhibitions of video game work. In fact, we even had a great VR performance by you. You're like trying to remember this, right? Did I know?
I don't know what you're talking about.
You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, so we've been doing a lot of that stuff. But the fight became, for all of this, became slightly less fun because the city wanted to renege on this space that we're in. That was a part of a Section 37 agreement, and which basically meant that the developer got to build more floors, and in return, they'd give space to a community group. We were chosen as that community group, and then they changed their mind after the developers got their space and their money. And so we've been fighting that for we're going on 6 years now, 6 years. And every day that before COVID, we were in there, we were running hundreds of events, like literally hundreds, with over 220 community partners, and doing just stuff that like inspires me. And nobody got a dime. Like I did this all volunteer. Everyone on the board was a working volunteer. The city's actions prevented us from getting any funding. We didn't care. We just kept doing it, cleaning toilets, serving pizza, hanging VR gear, all this stuff. This is stuff we were all doing, and then we were poised to go to court against the city to really close this out and make our case happen on March 15th of this year. And well, something else happened. Yeah. The world shut down. And so then after all that, after worrying about where the city was going to kick us out, I found myself being the last one out that day, on like March 9th or, whatever it was, coming out and closing the doors and locking it up because it wasn't safe to be there. And now what do you do, right? Now I'm here with you, and I'm working with my community remotely, and this is what we're doing.
Yeah, it has been a big transition for a lot of the community and a lot of developers. Deary Donna in chat says, I think I heard about Gamma Space when I visited TMAG building last summer because of a pin and patch show.
Yeah, that was a legendary event. There were a lot of people at the pin and patch show. I hope you got what you were looking for at the pin and patch show, Deary Don.
So like, let's rewind a little bit to before we can talk about this transition everybody's had to make. Talk to me about what is a co-op working space really? Like I've always been, I stay in my one place. I'm always in this room. I never leave this room. I do all of my development from this room. My community outreach, and I mean, there have been times when I've very often wondered, what is the co-op working experience like? Why are people drawn to it? What are the benefits of it, and what are people missing now that it's gone?
Yeah, so
temporarily gone.
Temporarily gone, we hope. Yeah, it's really interesting. I only learned about what it could be because of the community that came into the space, right? Like, I had like this notion that it'd be a shared workspace. We'd share the expense of renting the space, whatever, and it would be, it'd be a fun way to like just be around people, but we wouldn't have to like be up in each other's business, we just sort of like share space, and it'd be cozy, like being in a coffee shop without having to sit and pay coffee all the time, right?
Right.
And get work done. But what happened was something quite a bit different. For some, I think I mentioned it before, it was like a game jam experience. It was like they came down there and it's like they were jamming their ideas faster, and they had people to show it to that understood what they were doing. It wasn't just like, you were that one guy or one lady or whatever in your class, right? Like, and you were like, or after work, and you'd show it to someone and say, hey, what do you think of this? Like, I don't really play games, man, or whatever,
Yeah.
right? It was all people who knew what you were doing. So it was kind of special. And then we'd feed off each other's kind of ideas and enthusiasm and help each other out. And then it became this amazing resource share, right? Where we could go like, hey, we're we're driving down to PAX, how about we take your stuff with you, and you're going to fly, that's fine, but will you like go in early and get the hotel, and like all that stuff, right? And you do all these kind of like things that would help each other up on bigger projects, and then it became smaller and more like just everyday stuff, like, hey, how do you do that thing in Steam, or like anyone else going through this process of like FQA with Sony, it's like kind of bonkers, like what do we do here, who's got an animator they work with that they'd like to do this thing, and then all of a sudden people are getting jobs and work through this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sharing, and then trading off, like, well, listen, I'll do this for you if you do your skill for me. And so now money is no longer part of the equation. It was about effort and skill and time, right? And then you bring in the rest of the community to come in here, because it was like, oh, let's do an event and bring everyone in here for like further validation. So I think what it became, before, what it was and what I hope it will be again, is an opportunity for sharing on such a genuine level, where all aspects of the things I love about games come into play,
Right. And since the shutdown, how has the community been handling the transition back into their isolated little offices?
So it's funny you should say this. We had a moment, like sort of before we got into TMAC, where we were actually shut down for a few months, right? We were in between the lease expiring of our other space and fighting the first legal battle to get into TMAC. And I knew it'd be like kind of rough, but I didn't think it'd be like that bad. I thought people would be like, they'd be cool, right? Well, that little gap of time ended up being extremely destructive on a lot of people's lives, right? Like not and disruptive, but destructive. There were people that had just received funding for things that they had got a lot of support from the space, like through Gamma Space and through Dames Making Games, and all of a sudden their support system wasn't there, and they were working out of like not so great living conditions, or like forced to be in public places. And some of our members come from very marginalized, very socially kind of like ostracized groups, so it became not great for them. And I didn't realize until about a year later just how bad it was for a lot of people that were part of our community. And that hurt. That was hard to know. So when I transpose this, what's happening now with my understanding of that, and I have stepped up my efforts to be more in everybody's faces online, and our we have our Slack channels and all this stuff. But I can see some people are really hurting. They needed that. They don't have the resources. Sometimes it's equipment. Sometimes it's just people who just get what you're going through. And that's not there. And then a weird other thing is playtesting. We were taking for granted. We had this event that we do every other Monday called Friends Play Games, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's we eat pizza, we play games that we like, and we bring prototypes and things that we have working in progress. We also open it up to the public. It's totally free. And any given day, there's like between 20 and 75 people, that usually that will come to this event, right? And people really relied on that to get feedback about their game, right? Because otherwise it's, hey, download this link. We check out this link, and then maybe the person did and maybe they didn't. And maybe they give you good feedback and maybe you don't, or maybe you know them really well. Nothing really still beats, and I can't speak for you, actually, for me and the projects that I am, nothing beats for a lot of people the like watching people play a game.
Oh, no, I love it. I
Yeah.
love watching people play the game.
Yeah.
I'd ruin many of my PAX experiences by sitting there watching everybody play, and then like constantly updating the game while it's going on.
Yeah.
It's a for anybody in the chat who's like interested in making games, watching people play is is the best way you can have to understanding how your game actually works.
Yeah, yeah. And I think about that a lot. That's like something I've been trying to experiment with. Before the next kind of like major change in the world, which was like suddenly everyone waking up to the inequities of things, and being more conscious of you know Black and Indigenous and people of color and the plights that they're facing in their everyday, and understanding that a little bit more, not fully, but I feel like we're certainly more than usual. Um, a thing that I tried is I did a first friends play games online live, and it was great actually. Everyone came. We did two sort of segments to it. The first part was like an open Zoom communicate call that we were streaming onto Twitch, and we all shared works in progress and gave little presentations and like talked to the chat, and it was really cool. Then we turned off the stream and then just finished off with like internal chatting, and like, catching up and stuff like that. And it was really, really a great experience. And I really felt like, wow, I'm going to do this every month. This is something that I think the community needs. I think people love it, and all this. But something changed right after that when all this sort of exploded in the rest of the world. It seemed like less of a thing. It seemed less important. It seemed like maybe not the story to tell right at this moment. And so now I spend my time promoting events like from Dan's Making Games and other groups that are doing things with really focused marginalized, the sort of like the promotion of marginalized artists' work, and making sure that their stories and those organizations are centered because they're doing the work. Yes, I'm doing the work, but my work is always meant to be supportive and not to center around Gamma Space being cool or me being cool or whatever. I don't care about that. And so so I'm not doing that as much, but I am attending these other events. I'm promoting them as much as I can. I'm reaching out to people afterwards to see if there's ways I can help, and still doing that kind of thing. But this stuff is important. What you're doing right now today is important. It doesn't matter if like there's 5 people watching or 100. Like, the fact that we have these moments where we can talk about really seriously about what's happening and affecting us, and ultimately the industry and the people in it, I believe is like absolutely critical right now, because our sense of losing ourselves is really quite possible. You've experienced losing yourself in your project, right? But losing yourself in your project and also forgetting that there's a world out there because you can't actually access that world is also like, there's a difference between a self isolation that you chose, right? One that that is imposed, right? And I'm really conscious of that. And so I'm trying to balance these things, people's need for being on their own and needing space to process things, but also needing a friendly voice and an ear every once in a while to also like, hey, let's focus and get some work done.
Right. I mean, it is like you say, like I very intentionally self-impose my own forms of isolation, and I've participated in events like Bit Bazaar before, but I generally don't interact with the community all that much. It's just never been something that I've been willing to I don't know, like, invest a lot into personally. It's just been very hard for me to break that social barrier. One, because I always find social interaction, it's very easy to have good social interaction for a short amount of time. Find personally, the longer I prolong it, the worse it gets over time, or the worse I feel about it over time. But I absolutely recognize that that sort of thing is absolutely essential to people, and this is something that post release of my game I'm trying to change, because I also realize that there's a lot of downsides to doing the hermit in a cave kind of development. You don't get that feedback. You don't hear other voices. And that has its own downsides. Nobody's going to challenge your creative vision, but something unchallenged is also going to go uncontested, and that's got it doesn't
Yeah.
grow in the right ways. Um, but so I guess what I'm trying to ask is um, for the community that has relied on this for so long, what are they doing now? How have they been adapting and adjusting?
Hmm.
I know you mentioned the online event, but like personal stories. Is there are people slowing their projects down? Is
Yeah.
what's
Yeah. Like, so I do a member check-in every Monday from 7 to 8. Now, this is something I do, and sometimes there's one person there, and sometimes there's sometimes there's more, and we ultimately start talking about how we're doing with our projects and things like that. For some people, they've really slowed down, like they are finding it very difficult. So one member in particular told me that they would come into to Gamma Space once a week with their game development partner, right? And they'd come in once a week, and that was their day to work on this,
right?
right? And now that they're stuck at home, away from each other, away from that, they find it very difficult, like to find the headspace and to get into the mind space and the mindset to do that. They knew that if they came to Gamma Space, yes, they would work on their own stuff, and they'd probably talk to me, and they talk to someone else, and they like there'd be like stuff about games that was important to them, and they'd get to, and so they're finding it difficult. And even these check-ins and things are things that they're liking and they're appreciative of, but it's still not quite the same thing, you know. um I find that some of the other orgs that I'm involved with, a lot of people have doubled down on their like Slack communication and like participation on like organizing and planning stuff in a way that's really legitimate and feels really uh, galvanizing. But it's you can also tell partially because it's an outlet because it doesn't exist for them any other way, right? And this is like a really legitimate way for them to do that kind of connection. So I think for some, they're trying to stretch, like you are. They're trying to stretch to to make that happen, right? To make that connection in a time where it's more difficult, but because they recognize that maybe it was important to them, you know.
Right. Now, another thing. I mean, obviously, there's no events going on um, at this point. But I mean,
Mm-mm.
the events has always been what's drawn me into the community. I love a good opportunity to showcase my game,
Yeah.
and that it's always a lot of fun. Um, but like you mentioned earlier, uh, with the recent price announcement for certain digital events coming up later this year, um, they're astronomical, and I'm curious for your opinion on that. But also, I'm more curious. I don't think is there a fee for any? Do we pay for BitBazaar, or it's
So
like it's like negligible
first,
amounts?
yeah, like so the first year, we need to build up the infrastructure a bit. So we charged I think it was like a $25 tabling fee or something like
Brutal.
that. And then after that, it's been free. In fact, my favorite experiment is to go the other way. I've raised money through working with partners and stuff a couple of times to actually give money to to people who table so that they can make their own merch. In fact,
Right.
we did that with when we were at Harbor Center that one or Harborfront that one year with what is it, Celebrate Ontario. Anyway, we did a big outdoor Bit Bazaar there, and we actually worked into the budget that everyone got like $150 to make towards merch,
Some good
right?
merch.
And yeah, like I said, like that was the thing. If you're going to do this, you got to make merch, and here you got to spend your 150 on some stuff, right? That was the thing. And we would have like sometimes we'd even have like workshops on like, hey, how do I make good merch, and stuff like that, right? And
Right.
so how to make that stretch. So whenever possible, yeah, uh, it's about giving opportunities, not taking. Extracting from the community is not something that I'm interested in doing at all, other than the joy I get, honestly, of like working with people and seeing stuff, right? But like, I know that bastard,
Sick.
but yeah, sick joy. Uh, but can you say bastard on TV? I'm
Y-
sorry.
yes,
Yeah,
you
okay.
can say whatever you want.
Um, but it's funny. It's something I've also informed the way I work with the people in the community that I end up working with professionally, like, I don't take a share or a stake in people's companies. For example, this is a typical thing at like startup incubators and things, which people compare Gamma Space to a lot because of the type of work that gets done there, right? But I don't take a stake, and generally I work for free until I've either helped secure funding or some funding has come in, and then I work for a very like scaled community rate. Like the comparison of what I will charge and work with someone in the community, like a 3-person indie team,
Right.
compared to like a corporation over here,
Mm-hmm.
is very different. And so I keep that as part of. I do those things so I can sustain myself through this whenever possible. Because when I'm not making money through working with people, which isn't all the time, because I really try to hold off as long as possible, I take contracts, and I run around doing this stuff for people, but I don't want to, right? I want to do all this stuff all the time for the community, right?
No, when you say secure funding, like what does that typically mean?
Yeah, so a few different things. In my case, I've built up enough relationships over the years to like be able to like approach platform holders and hardware companies to fund games, or work with like some of those great programs I was talking about before, like Ontario Creates or Ontario Arts Council, and get funding through that, like through in the form of grants and things like that. On rare occasions, for larger projects, I can help find like a traditional investor potentially or something like that. But I try to steer people away from that unless it's absolutely necessary. Yeah. But yeah, so one of the things I like to do is to find ways to provide resources for games, and particularly for studios that are led by members that have come from Dames Making Games, or people that are coming in from really marginalized like perspectives and positions within the industry, right? Because like for me to go and do this for, like, I can do this for white dudes all day, right? Straight white dudes, I could do this, but they don't need me, and they often tap my shoulder, and we don't even get along as much most of the time, because honestly they don't really need my help, right? Like they think they do because I can get them like some free hardware or something like that, but the truth is they don't need me, right? They already have, they've got all the privilege in the world to make all the mistakes they want. They don't they don't care, like this. But other groups, I take this really seriously if they come and approach me for help, right? I'm like, they're taking a risk, like creatively, professionally, in this like toxic environment. Their like identities are on the line sometimes, that stuff's like real. Like it's hard for us maybe to imagine, and we might even scoff at it sometimes, but it's like, it's real. I've seen it. I've seen people that are friends, and people that have become really close, that have close with, that have been working on stuff, and like have them, they're attacked or like pushed to the side when I'm watching other dudes like just get the benefits of their work, or whatever, right? And it's pretty sad. So a big part of what I do is to kick open the door. Like I will go and talk to my contacts at various companies, and I will be that persistent asshole that sits there emailing all the time. And so when some of these other people don't feel as comfortable doing that, I'm saying, hey, I'm working with this great artist, and she's doing some amazing stuff. You got to check out this game. Crickets. You got to check it out. Crickets. You gonna be at GDC? I'm gonna be there. We're gonna go have lunch. Okay, Henry, fine, let's have lunch. Bring the game. I bring the game, the deck, everything. Like we do this, we do it. We have lunch, and it's like, okay, I'm sending the dev kits over. Fine. And then I like that's part of what I do, right? Because not that these people, a lot of these companies actually have really great individuals working at them, right? But it's like hard to get through sometimes. That's just the reality, right? They like when I say, you got to check out this is like a lesbian focused adventure game, this is wild, you got to check this out, and they're like, I don't know, Henry, and it's like, no, you do know, you're gonna like this, and so I'm gonna be very persistent in making that happen.
Why do you think it is hard, or why do you think those crickets come? why do you think it's hard to get that response, off the get go?
There's a couple of reasons, right? One of them is this like the illusion of the demographics that play video games that still plays very much into like how these companies market and think about things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they know down to like the milligranule that that's actually not true, but when they tie in all the ad buys and who's watching at certain places that they get the most traction from, because they have to innovate in advertising and marketing as well, if that's
Right.
you know, and
Right.
that is hard work and very costly. It is much easier to know that E3 is in June and we're going to go do this
Right.
and then we're and we're going to do these 3 or 4 steps and we know who's going to come and we're going to spend the money on this ad for Super Bowl and we're going to do this and this. It's just much easier, right, to do that. It's not that it's the lowest common denominator and the thing that has been groomed and tuned for decades. You know,
I can recognize and relate to that quite a lot because, like, our game doesn't demo well at PAX. I mean, we love PAX, but it doesn't demo well at PAX. Our demographic isn't the typical gamer.
As defined by these corporations, I want to say.
Sure. Yes. As defined by the corporations, right? And
yeah.
I often do have significant doubts about the traditional marketing channels, but I also don't know where to go with to open it up. All we do is just deal with our own community. It slowly grows word of mouth, and that's it. So then I guess where would you suggest or how do you think that this I guess revolution in games marketing can stem from?
So I've been giving this a lot of thought, and and like you, I'm figuring it out. I don't have magic bullet answers. There are a few things though but I do have a few things that I think are really important. I think the times in transition, like now when a new console comes out, is really important for indies right now. And you saw this a little bit with Sony with their last, their unveiling of the PS5, right? And I can't remember what the event was called, but they show Days of Play or whatever, and like they showed a bunch of games, and it started with Grand Theft Auto, and everyone laughed because it's like that game's been out for like longer than we've been alive, and not knocking all the talented people that work on this great game, whatever. But I'm just saying, like, we've seen it a few times. But what happened after that? Look at all those weird games that showed up, right? There is like our friends co-op mode in Montreal, with like Goodbye Volcano High. Like that game, what appears to be a coming of age, non-binary character, dinosaur, like anthropomorphic, like, dinosaurs, with like pop songs and rock songs and animated, and like that game is not screaming PlayStation 5, whatever you think that means. Like that is not that is the furthest thing away from Grand Theft Auto 5. Right?
It was an interesting showcase, especially considering like typically in those console reveal showcases, you're like, here's the graphics pushing, like we're not gonna spend too much time on a game like that.
Exactly, and because my personal secret is like all I want to see with this new hardware is like people pushing art direction and stuff, right? Like I always want to see that because it's like I don't, I know you've got a million trillion triangles, like I get it, and I know you can make bullet shells land on the floor in a glittery cascade, that will blind me forever in HDR. I think that's fantastic, but give me something like that game or some of the other kind of weird stylized games that we saw, and it's like you're pushing the what isn't real really far, and I find that really exciting, right? So the point is you're seeing this sort of thing because this is like the most I've seen a company openly, like of this size, openly acknowledge that there are other people that'll be interested in this $800 game console. Right? Okay, I'm guessing on the price. I assume it's $800 by the time we're finished taxes in Canada. But my point is, it struck me as really interesting because I'm not saying that it was a perfect showcase and there was a great balance of absolutely everything, but I really saw, compared to Microsoft and things like that, where Microsoft, they'll show something really cute every once in a while, you know, but that's not what I'm talking about. Like something like Goodbye by Volcano High is like that's like a very mid-core, you know, like,
Right.
like it's a very different thing than just putting like, here's a mascot game that we've resurrected, right? And which, you know, Sony did that as well, but like they didn't put all their eggs in that basket for like showing something accessible, you know.
Right.
So anyway, these transitional times, it's a double-edged sword. We know for a fact that making these very big games, the very big AAA games, are their their Last of Us 2s and whatever, is an expensive, long undertaking. And every time we add more to the technology equation, we're not actually making it easier for game makers to make those games. It becomes harder because the drive for realism and the detail required and those triangles I talked about aren't going to make themselves, right?
Yeah.
So there is always gaps, like big gaps in the which is why they start sniffing around. Now there's PlayStation indies. You know, why is there PlayStation indies? Because there's going to be huge gaps between big first party and second party games.
Right.
So if you can use contacts and relationships to get into a meeting and present a thoughtful presentation and pitch that is of the equivalent of how people with more money would present such a game,
Mm-hmm.
even if you don't have it, it makes a big difference. It shows that you are, quote unquote, the professional that can play by their rules and that you could handle getting a check for X amount of dollars from them, right? And more importantly, you're an indie game with a scope that could be done in the next year and a half, right? Because they need that content. So I love transitions like this. And the early days of the Switch was like this too. We managed to get 3 Switch titles in before the glut. And like that was good. But I knew it by halfway through the production of the second one. I was like, I got one more to try to get in here. You know, I was like, I've got one more, and then after that, I'm sure they'll sign me up forever because they know who I am now, whatever. But you know, I'll never get like on a showcase ever again or anything.
Right.
You know, but we got into a couple showcases.
It's yeah, that's that. I mean that. See, I like watching the transition periods between consoles, because you do have, you know, those first to platform success stories, but I also don't think that is the necessary like revolution in marketing that we're gonna need long term in order to shake up that stereotype about who plays games, or to make it easier to you know, produce games that are to the different demographics, because you know it, like, yes, the PS5 and the Series X or whatever might have really nice you know, early adoption titles, but you know, eventually they all eventually become open platforms or relatively open platforms,
right?
And that's when you get. I had a weird argument this week about Steam, and like, God, I like, on one hand I like absolutely hate how like saturated it has become, but at the same time it is like super fair and like it's relatively equal. Everybody can just like put your game up there. Okay,
Yeah,
it's gonna get
okay. No, I mean, here's why I disagree with that. And I'm not going to tell you, like, Steam has a lot of problems with it. Like,
it has a lot of
discoverability
problems. It's a
like
ton of
it
problems.
has a lot of problems, right? Like, discoverability is still a problem, right? Like, I don't buy the fair argument, because the bottom line is that when you have AAA games that have been on with like or studios with like, or publishers with like decades of content that can drop their game from 10 years ago down to 75 cents or whatever, and it like just balloons up and everyone's doing that, you know, then you have to like, then the indies like devalue their games, and then, you know, like it's the discoverability doesn't get any better. I don't think it's fair because they've invested all this time building this library with all their money and time and tech to then like go and reduce it to like just like absolute rock bottom costs. Like indies spend years doing their stuff and they'll never match that. And then instead they have the race to the bottom, you know? And so I don't call that a fair platform. I call that like an exploitive one, no matter how you stretch it. Second, I think like the discovery tools are still tuned to a lot of the thinking we were talking about when talking about how Sony presents things and things like that. There are certain keywords that have been in our face for so long that it doesn't matter that we might change them. Those keywords have, 2 decades of
right,
of presence, whether it's like conscious or like subliminal, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And like that's why if you type in puzzle platformer, it's stupid what you get, right? Like it doesn't make any sense.
I'm genuinely curious. Hold on,
yeah,
I'll have a quick look.
Yeah, well, but you'll be looking under you, and you're the type of person that's probably looked at a lot weirder stuff. But yes, I'm talking about the average person, right? But I'm gonna say that let's take a look though. I am curious too. But
there's a lot of stuff here.
Yeah, there's just a lot of stuff, right?
Apparently, Superliminal's a puzzle platform. Oh, I guess it is.
Sure. I stand corrected. Everyone buy
Everybody buy Superliminal. I think I agree with you about the AAAs. Like I don't want to get into a whole like capitalist theory argument, but like somebody, not necessarily me, would say that like investment and reward on that investment is still fair, right? In the capitalistic system. Not saying that I support it or agree with it, but that is the devil's argument there.
Other than how it started in the first place,
right?
And how many people were quashed along the way?
Right. Where did the first $2?
I gotta say it, right? I gotta say it. You ready? There's no ethical consumption under capitalism.
Okay. It's
anyway,
where I see the issue of Steam's inequity is like, if it were a 100% algorithmically driven system, I think it would be more fair. Yet there are the big publisher sales, there are the big banner sales, and Steam gets to pick and choose some winners that way, and it always goes to those megacorps with tons of catalog and opportunity to do more, I guess.
And the scale of those sales compared to even the most successful indie games, it's just like you can't even compare, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the problem, right? And so, but all of that aside, the question still stands: what is the marketing?
Yes. So eventually the platforms become more and more open as time goes on. So we end up with a glut on the platforms. Where's the marketing?
Yeah. So I was briefly excited when Steam started those curator lists, right? And I was briefly excited because I thought, are we going to get game DJs? Are we going to get people that are going to like write thoughtfully about games, talk about them, start making them culturally kind of like relevant in some other context, right? Through social media, and then bring them back here. And like, I was like, I haven't toyed with it for a minute. I think we had a BitBazaar curated list of games that had been at BitBazaar, where I even wrote like a little thing about each game, that was in BitBazaar. And it was like, because they give you like 10, 20 words or whatever to say. And I was like, this is cool. This is like a thing that I could see maybe being helpful. That yes, it still becomes a popularity contest, but you could, if you have a certain voice in a certain community, you could like kind of curate and educate and share, and it could be pretty cool, right? But that never really went anywhere because the tools became kind of like they didn't really do anything with the tools in particular.
Yeah, we get requests from Steam curators who swear that they're going to provide so much value to our product. And request 10 keys a piece
Ooh.
It's like it's clearly like, and it's funny. I scrolled down to the suggested curators, and it's literally the number one is called "Follow Yes/No" to see more reviews like this, and the written review for every single one of these is just yes, 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 no, yes, no, yes. Like there's no nuance. There's no um. Let me see. Like it's literally nothing.
Yeah,
Um,
like
I felt the same way about the Steam Curators concept.
conceptually, right? Because
Yes.
you're a guy who likes music, right? You're a music guy. I can see by your cool collection behind you. You
Oh,
know,
thank you.
you're a music guy, and so like the value of strong curation and taste making, right? Like it can be like films are like that too, right? There's people that follow certain film critics or people that talk about films a certain way or magazines, like online magazines, like and like in some ways, like unfortunately, game journalists are taking so many weird turns that they could have been part of that conversation too, but instead they weren't. And it's whatever it is now. Like it's not. And this is not to say there aren't good writers. So when I say this, I'm just talking about a blanket statement that is like the industry and how they work together. Of course, there's amazing writers. Like I'm not like and I've met many of them, and they're wonderful people, and they do good work. But on the flip side, it's like you know their outlet, their publication has nothing to do with this conversation whatsoever.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. It doesn't. It's been a long while since I've really given a hoot about any outlet's opinion on or reporting on things, just because it hasn't provided me the same level of value as I think it did 10 years ago.
hmm. Look, we got Pariah Hound here said, well, there's an issue with oversaturation now that the platforms are starting to expand to being international, right? This is like a weirdly, so thank you for that, but this is a weird point. Let me change the lens a little bit, right? Games Making Games is a great example of their DMG Toronto, right? Like they were about the physical space and being in Toronto. So their events were Toronto focused. They would stream the odd event, but really it was about being part of Toronto and coming in like this. Since COVID, everything is now open up everywhere, and their audience is incredibly diverse from all over the world now. Okay, like they're coming in, and so these DMG Toronto people are coming in and taking workshops on tabletop game jams or you know like how to do X, something like this, or be involved with the social. This is now a much bigger audience. When I did the stream, we did look at the demographics with the Gamma Space stream. I was shocked to see people from more countries than I expected. Right? Like I was like, who knows about us? Who cares? Maybe North America. Like, but the people were coming from different places. The audience doesn't necessarily get bigger, but you are potentially capturing a more varied audience that are looking for your thing. But it was basically the same number of people in all these cases that I would expect to see at these events, right? They're just from different places. So you could say the audience gets larger and the potential for it is larger, but it's going to take a while, I think, before we see any kind of real effect from that, because the internet has been online and accessible to everyone forever. And on the platform side, Steam has been multi-country now for how long? Like a long time,
Wow.
right? For like, yeah. And like in the e-shops and like all the different shops, they've all existed, in different ways. Yes, I know if you're in Hong Kong or you're in China, you don't get all the same content as other stores, and there's exceptions for that.
It's
But I think, yeah, you're gonna say, sorry.
Oh, I say it's interesting that you bring up China, because I saw a very interesting tweet retweeted from our Will O'Neill,
Mm.
that since the start of the pandemic, there have been about over 120 new game studios registered in
Yes.
China every single day.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yes,
insane.
it
Like,
is.
like
So
like I can't imagine, like, if we're already facing over 100 like
yeah,
30 something games a day being released, like how much more is that going to be increasing with the international market?
So here's what's interesting is that the other thing that other industries are catching on to, and I was talking about this from an arts level and stuff like this, but when I sit on these industry calls about what's happening in the sector here in Ontario and stuff like that, in a lot of ways, we're doing okay for those who are at the middle studio and beyond, and people have established product. They're doing okay because people are buying games. They're at home buying video games. Okay, period. I think it was, I can't remember, but the March numbers were like 3 times as high as like any other March ever, or something like that.
I mean, a quarter of that was Animal Crossing, but
a quarter of that was Animal Crossing. Yes, but you're going to see this trend because one of the few things that can be reliably made during this uncertain times at home with distributed teams is video games. Right? Because I mean, depends on what game you're talking about, and if you're talking about whether or not we can all be in a room doing mocap and facial capture and all that kind of stuff, that's a lot different. I get it.
Very, very few indie studios are at that level.
Very few indie studios are at that level, but indies who have been working remotely and in between their other jobs and coming to Gamma Space and whatever else, like you're saying, I think we talked earlier, you said like your everyday life is largely unchanged, right? You work at home, you do. So like, I'm not saying you're not feeling the effects of this stuff, by the way. I'm just saying, like, in terms of how you work, it hasn't necessarily been that affected, right?
No, it has been nothing but actually it has been relatively positive for my workflow. Like we'd maybe meet once every couple of months, like period.
And so this is like a thing, right? So it's like, if they're thriving, the content's coming, people are still making games, there's an audience that wants it. It's on one hand, it sounds like an exciting time, but these studios that are coming out of China and the ones that the games that are coming out to deal with all the expense of making them and justify them from like AAA studios and stuff like that, you will still see your big cinematic adventure games, like your Last of Us. You'll see a few of those. They'll take longer to make and all that, but they have to justify their existence, do things that bring in monetization more consistently, right? It can't be we work for 6 years on Mass Effect and then everyone buys Mass Effect and that's enough to keep the studio open for another couple of years, right? It's just not a thing that works under the kind of scale that they're and expectations.
Now we need to release Grand Theft Auto 5 consistently for 8 years.
Right, exactly. And so, like, when keeping that in mind, these 120 these like game studios that are coming out of China, their market is saturated and primarily concerned with free to play.
Yep.
They're primarily concerned with monetization strategies involving everything from loot boxes to whatever, these things are, so this is the new internet gold rush. This is like your .com and your VC, like, explosion into apps and disruption, right? Because who can make the best of this? And a lot of these companies, like 90% of their budgets go purely into marketing. I don't know, I think it was like 2 years ago, I was at GDC and I was in the show floor and they had this huge like LED, multi-screened, what do they call them, marquees, hanging over the show floor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it had like I don't know, was it like Clash of Kings, not Clash of Clans, not the whatever
not the real one,
the knockoff one that still does as well, essentially. And they were showing a commercial, like I thought was on loop, but it wasn't. The company had gone around the world refilming the commercial in the local region of like certain Chinese areas and stuff like this, right? Bringing in actors that were famous from that region, right? And I sat there, I was there all day because I was working with some people at one of the booths, and I was there all day and I did not see the same commercial, like repeat. Like it was just all day.
Hyper local,
over and over again. The budget and like the discipline and the marketing like focus to do that is like, and that's where people tell me I met after that. I actually ended up meeting with a large Chinese publisher who was interested in potentially acquiring a game that I was working on. and they were telling us, would you work with our team to monetize it and do this, right? And I was like, the whole conversation was like super fascinating. But they were saying, yeah, we will spend, 65 million on a game. It's marketing and the game. Like we'll spend 1 million of that on the game.
Right.
64 million on the marketing if we can make $75 million.
Right.
And I'm just sitting there going like, I can't even. That's they're playing a different game.
Right. Yeah, no, for sure. Because I mean, never mind the disparity in like types of consumers that play these games between, versus the type that will download a $10-$20 indie game. They're in totally different spaces. But that's fascinating to know that they've done the marketing revolution. They've done a marketing revolution for that group.
That's right.
They've figured it out, what needs to be done. And I wish it was as simple as I just shoot, one commercial and then redub it with, different like communities of types of people that would be interested in my game. But it's such a different psychology, I feel. That it wouldn't work. We get laughed out of the room for that, like no question.
Yeah. Right. Can you imagine going in your Ontario Creates marketing development budget and saying, "Yeah, we're gonna just reshoot the same commercial, and we're gonna go to Manitoba and get a local politician or musician.
We'll get the most popular streamer in Manitoba."
Yeah, right. And like, I mean, it's impossible to like comprehend. So again, I know this isn't answering your question, but I guess what I'm saying is, it's gonna take more than what like PAX and festivals like. It's going to take more than just saying we're online now and telling people they're going to go there. This whole summer of games or whatever, summer game fest or whatever, like, come on, we get more news than we've ever received about video games already. And then they just made it doubly so every day for like 3 months. And then I assume we're going to get crickets for like just after,
right.
Until the ramp up to Christmas or whatever. Right. But
on top of that, I thought you were talking about the Steam Game Festival for a second.
We could talk about that too.
900 games, for 1 week.
Yeah, for 1 week, right? And then, conceptually, do I love the idea of like getting people to get sort of polish their show floor demos enough to be something to download, like for something like this over DRM that gets destroyed afterwards. Like there's something kind of like punk about that I like, and all that. But at the same time, 900 games, like who's like the discoverability on this is like ridiculous. Devolver did the trick that we've all dreamed of doing with their like virtual what do you call it, abandoned festival,
the
right?
Expo Land. Yeah, it was a great little demo.
It's a great demo. Only works once. It's they whatever they did and spent and do that, they can't do it again. It won't get the same impact, right. I don't, next year they can't do it again, right? Like
they won't.
And they won't, right?
They're bored of it already.
Right? But so will everyone, is my point, right? So like it was a great little attention getter. I'd love to know what it did for them and how many people played and all that kind of stuff. But like all that being said, that's wonderfully creative. So we turn this question one degree this way, and we say, what has every other artist done in the history of art when the demand is high, but the supply is also really high and discoverability is limited? Mm-hmm. We need to look at how music tries. We look at how the corporations failed them multiple times. We have to look at so many different things. And just when they were figuring it out, by like banking on things like merch and performances and taking more control of that and doing that stuff, COVID comes around and now they can't do that shit. Right?
But I think that saturation happened like for music at least, that happened a long time ago, and I'm really afraid that the answer is that you go TMZ tabloid. Yeah, that's when you start shaving your head and hitting people with umbrellas and having scandals and cheating on each other and these kinds of things for news headlines.
So the point that I agree, and I think the point that I'm trying to make is it did happen a long time ago, but what I'm saying is that even after all this other stuff, is what I'm trying to say, is that the artists that were working in different mediums that have found other ways to do this, to find some cases hyper local support that was paying for them, or like regional support that was paying for their stuff. They're not getting to be rocket stars and rocket stars, rocket stars. Let's go for that. They're not getting to be rocket stars.
They're not rocket stars.
They're not rocket stars. They're shooting for the stars and they're rockers. But anyway, but the point that I'm trying to make is like they started to carve out intensely individualistic, creative ways of doing this that connected with smaller groups of fans more consistently.
Right.
Is really what I'm getting at, right? And a lot of that had to do with performance and owning the means of their production again, and not going with labels. So I'm saying it's a fraction of like the 70s when, Aerosmith got like 12 album deals and whatever money they got and royalties and riders and all that stuff. And then those guys were making an album and touring every year for like 12 years straight, but there is a happy medium here. But the truth is it can't be controlled by anyone but the artists.
Right.
And that's where it has to go. And so that's why, I look to itch and I look to places that people are doing self-promotion and self-releases in different ways. 30% from Steam on an indie game is absolutely ridiculous.
It's a lot.
Right? Like it doesn't even make sense. It doesn't make sense.
Talking about how much money you have to pay back to Steam, or how much money Steam keeps. The distributor cut. Is that 30%?
They are. Yeah. So sorry for those of you at home that are just following along now. You put your game on Steam for like $20. They take 30% of that. But you see, even that's a lie, because they encourage you to launch at a sale price. So you're already undercutting yourself. Mm-hmm. And then to feed the algorithm and stay on the top of these Steam charts and, all these different like ways of engaging with summer sales and things like that, they keep asking you to discount. Yeah. And so your $20 game is actually netting you like $4, by the time you're done, and tell me if you've heard this before, and think about that before the $20. And I was begging indies as early as like 2013 and 14 to be pricing their games at least at $20, and they would get, oh no, we'll never sell anything. I'd be like, you gotta at least be there. Stop doing 10, stop doing $10, stop doing under $9.99. No, if I get enough people at $9.99, yeah, you'll make $10.
Yeah. No, and that's one thing that we've definitely considered a lot of times when trying to decide the prices on things. I mean, it's a delicate balance, between what is fair relative to what is out there, for the same price, versus what it's actually going to return once marked down on the markdown. And then it's like, well, okay, once you do the math, you do want to go for a higher price, but then you look at what's available at the higher price, and now you're into like that AA territory sometimes, and it's like really scary. And I want to blame a little bit of the iPhone mobile market for devaluing the price of games. Steam sales for devaluing the price. There were a lot of developers early in to the Steam life cycle that got really great advantage off of those Steam sales because the market wasn't so saturated. I mean,
sure.
we were pretty early in that tail with ASM, and I think we benefited from it a good amount. But like, man, did we create a nightmare for ourselves? So like today, it's like it's really hard.
Yeah.
Pariah House we wondered about how Steam pressures devs to put their games. It's not like, okay, when we say it pressures devs, they don't like send us an email being like, yo buddy, you better discount your game right now. It's not like
actually
that.
Though wait, to be fair though, they do. They actually say, when you first launch your game, they say, we suggest that you mark down your game and make it on sale to make it more. They do actually. They don't say it in a threatening way. They're just saying, you probably should do that.
It would be in your best interest.
It would be in your best interest. And they're saying that because they know that that's like how you entice new people to try something new, blah, blah, blah. But like, they do pressure you. That's a form of pressure.
Actually, it's a really funny contradiction, because the algorithm itself like really relies on indie developers bringing their communities and bringing their fan base into the system for launch day. and then for like, because that's that's how you start the snowball. If you don't have like a bunch of people buying your game at the start, you don't
Mhm.
even get like anywhere. It doesn't even like, don't even make a
And
blip in the system.
it's very hard to dig back out from that, right?
uh,
And they even tell you, this kills me. Okay, this kills me. They recommend that you change your website domain to be your Steam store page,
right,
right?
just so that everybody
Right,
right,
just so everything goes there. Now on one hand you're like, oh, that makes sense, except for you're like literally funneling all of your information,
the SEO, yeah.
everything into Steam, right? See, I think about this shit all the time, right? Like it's like, and it makes me angry because I feel like, again, it's just rigged. It's just more of this rigging of like the work that indies do to be creative, to create ideas that end up getting integrated into AAA games like years later, and like
Hmm.
and innovation that gives like joy and like new voices to new amplified voices to the industry and to people who play games, people who appreciate
And new
art.
game mechanics.
The game mechanics it kills me to see that, like like you're doing the development. I used to laugh, what was it used to be the other way, with software development, right? Adobe would do all this work for years, right, to like do some sort of interface thing for like Photoshop or whatever, right? That would only be taken and improved on by some little program later that would be a flash in the pan success at a fraction of the cost, right? And so it was like, thank you, Adobe, for doing all that UX research for us. We now have this function, right, in the tool, right? So yeah, I think like but unfortunately I feel like it goes the other way now, because games, the whole marketplace and the whole and all the choices and the marketing and the language and everything is so dominated by these larger players that they just pick and choose and go, huh, this is cool over here.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm glad you spent 6 years doing this. Our team, we can throw a few people in there and implement. Yeah, we can just implement it over here, right? And it's like, great, you know and who can blame like like when I think about like studios that have been swallowed up by Valve in particular, right?
Hmm.
Like, you know you got like your Firewatch, and Valve comes along and says, that was really cool and you guys are really creative. How about we buy your company and your games and everything, and you just come work with us? You couldn't possibly offer us enough. Would this number be okay?
Right.
And like how, I'm not gonna tell them that they're bad for doing that. They worked hard, they did their thing, but
Yeah.
like that is quashed now, right? Like that innovation is not out there right now. And we've learned that their games all get canceled, or like they get time to work on them and then they get transferred to other teams or whatever. It's a loss for the advancement in general of our art. Do we care about that? That's the question. Do you care about that shit?
So let's say then you're an indie and you want to resist against this. What are your few steps?
So, number one, make smaller games, make them more often. Sorry, Justin. Okay,
No,
but no,
it's been a big shift already. Like we're not doing another 6 year game.
like you can build a base. Like you can take a page from the AAA people right now by making your own catalog. I'm not saying make that everything's a winner and everything has to be super like one step past a jam game or something like that. But there is a happy medium between being a solo dev working for 6 years on something, or a team of three that's working for a year and a half on something or something like that, right?
Mm.
But once you get through a certain threshold, you have to realize that the chances of you making your money back without publisher support or without some magical other metric is very unlikely. Like it's we Ooblets came out, like, or it didn't come out. It sort of came out
Right.
yesterday, right? That game that game was obviously a labor of love. It was filled with love and joy. It should have been left. It should have been out years ago, even if it wasn't perfect. It just should have come out.
Right.
They worked on that for so long, and it went through two publishers and funding from a million different sources and all this. And while they might have paid for the production of that game, will they get rich off it like that with all the way that's, I don't know. by the way. I have no insight into this, so that's the disclaimer in this. But it's hard for me to believe that they're gonna see anything from that with all the hands it has passed through, like that they're gonna be able to like take that and not be burnt out and like make something new if they want to, right? Like it's, I mean, it'll work out, sure, because there's so many people behind it, and Microsoft is like very bullish with it, and but like that's the kind of like quote unquote inspirational story that hurts indies, right? Shovel Knight's another one, right? Like Shovel Knight, come on, I love Shovel Knight. I love those guys. Like everything about Shovel Knight is great, right? But the story about how Shovel Knight came to be should tell you never to make a Shovel Knight game that way. like never ever do that, right?
Just too much time and too much effort and
too much risk and money and effort, but they lucked out. And I will say lucked out, because it could have gone just as easily the other way for them. Easily. Just lost everything. Everyone broken, losing their homes, like I don't understand the go for broke. Part of it is that there, and there's also a privilege mentality that like a lot of the white dudes that are involved with some of these games that I've mentioned, they approach it like VC stuff, right? And they have invisible support lines that like they don't really talk about, right? Like partners that support,
I've looked up some. I don't know any. I'm not talking any specifics, but I've looked up some creators, and I'm like, these are just random people that have had like booths near us at Indie Mega Booth or whatever, and I'm like, oh wait, they sold a software company for like $20 million like 2 years ago. Of course, they can just like afford to like dick around on a game jam, like,
or like I think a lot about the what do you call it, Stardew Valley guy, right? Like Stardew Valley brings a lot of joy to people. I love it, right? But like his wife supported him through that whole thing. He didn't just sit there on the kitchen table by himself. He had a really important support network that is not part of the conversation, right? And like I think that's dangerous stuff, right? Because it sets the wrong kind of mindset. Like if you guys just put your head down, it's gonna work out for you just fine. Like
straps.
Yeah, exactly. It's it's just a thing that I'm really conscious of. So make smaller games, right? I think embrace your community and your public often. Like hiding your game, secretive things, it's a real risk. It's a super risk. Super, like, I'm not saying people don't know how to like market through mystique. I think it's possible, but unless you've been cultivating this kind of concept as like a core of your like artistic personality for like since you first started making art, you're gonna find this a difficult thing to pull off, just like because you think it's the right way to go. It's something I say show your work, show it often. There are some definite risks to announcing things too early and announcing things before you've talked to people to see if they would like to announce it for you and give you a lot of money for it. There are definite scenarios where that's part of it, but showing your general work, and showing your process is not a bad thing. In fact, it endears you to your audience and often connects you with them in very meaningful ways. There's a reason why people like, prior to like the major internet age, whenever they got a photo of like their favorite musician, like in the studio or something, right? Like it was like you saw a little bit about like them in a very human way making something, that's a powerful thing. So share with your community. And like also this one I think is really important, and that is like provide as much opportunity as you can for those who don't have those opportunities, because it's amazing what happens when you partner or work with or celebrate the work of someone else that you're working with that wouldn't have had the chance. Everyone gets elevated from that. Like everyone. No, not to say that you look like a hero for doing it or anything like that, but it shows that like the capacity for like collaboration and empathy is really deep, and I think that's like really powerful. And so I've been thinking about that a lot with a lot of my collaborations right now. I'm working primarily with women who've come from different programs connected to Dames Making Games, and I think about how lucky I am to have those relationships and the things that I'm doing and the things that I'm seeing and how it's affecting me creatively and how I'm able to take what I know and push that forward. And like, I think it's worth talking about, you know. I think it's worth sharing and people seeing it, because like, this is the way you could have this too, as I always say, you know, you could be this way too. So these are some ways I think that create authentic connections with an audience that will support you and will be happy and will support the level of work you can do. And if you somehow do a breakout hit, then you can push forward more, you know, and you can take bigger risks without compromising yourself and others, you know.
Right.
That's my take.
Those are some good advice. Those are some good points. I think we are. It's been time. I think we can wrap things up. I mean, with all that said, we will be continuing to show our work and involve our community this weekend. Ooh. Saturday and Sunday, we'll be doing more development streams. We will continue to uplift our fellow developers. In a minute, we're going to raid Ragnarok, who's working on his game right now. And Henry, any parting words?
Well, first, thank you for doing this. And honestly, seeing you stretch this way, and like I've been noticing the way you've been like engaging people in the community, and I also know that you haven't been doing it just in service to your game. It feels very genuine, and I really appreciate it, and I'm really happy to be on here. And I hope we get to do something like this again soon. And I really do appreciate everyone in the chat who's been asking the right questions and saying nice things, and it's cool. I really appreciate it, and so I hope you all stay safe and well, and catch you on the flip side.
Likewise. All right. Well, it has been a pleasure having you, Henry. If you want to follow Henry on Twitter, there's his handle. I do recommend going and reading that bio description, because it is rather well crafted. It is a well crafted.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to kick it on the thanks for watching screen. Thank you all for watching, and then I'll send you all to Ragnarok, and you can go bother him while he tries to do some work. Ciao, guys. Thanks again.
Take care.